The weight of a city of an empire rested on the shoulders of Lachlan Crowe, but at this moment all he felt was the unbearable lightness of waiting. His world operated on nanoseconds and billion-dollar valuations, yet here in the hushed opulence of the Gilded Quill, time had slowed to a torturous crawl. Each tick of his Patek Philippe, watch a sound only he could hear, was an accusation. A water glass remained unfilled. A bread basket sat empty. His server, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Lena, moved with a placid grace that he found infuriating. He was Lachlan Crowe. He didn't wait. What he couldn't possibly know was that he was only alive to be impatient tonight, because years ago, this very same woman had refused to let him die. Lachlan Crowe did not enjoy food. He consumed fuel. He didn't savor wine. He evaluated assets. The Gilded Quill, with its Michelin stars and month-long waiting list, was not a destination for pleasure, but a strategic battlefield. Tonight's dinner was with Dr. Anneliese Schmidt, the formidable head of the Schmidt Foundation, a philanthropic behemoth whose endorsement could greenlight his new Apex Cares initiative, a project designed to polish his corporation's tarnished public image. It was a multi-billion-dollar deal, cloaked in the civility of coq au vin. He tapped a manicured finger on the starched linen tablecloth. "Unacceptable," he muttered to his junior associate, a nervous young man named Peter, who flinched at his boss's tone. "We've been seated for 7 minutes. Where is the water? Where is the sommelier?" Peter stammered, I'm sure they're just very busy, Mr. Crowe." "Busy is a euphemism for inefficient." Lachlan snapped his cold blue eyes, scanning the room. He mentally calculated the restaurant's nightly take versus its staffing costs, automatically identifying redundancies. He saw the waitress Lena across the dining room, patiently explaining the specials to an elderly couple who were clearly celebrating an anniversary. She smiled, a small, genuine thing that seemed out of place in his world of calculated expressions. It irritated him. "This is the one?" he asked, his voice dripping with disdain. "This is the server assigned to the most important table in the room." Finally, she approached a silver tray balanced expertly on one hand. "Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Lena. May I start you off with some water for the table? We have still or sparkling." Her voice was calm, a low, steady current in the river of his impatience. It was familiar in a way he couldn't place, a fleeting echo from a long-forgotten dream. He dismissed it as an auditory illusion. "We'll have a bottle of the 05 Petrus," Lachlan said, not looking at her, his eyes fixed on the door awaiting Dr. Schmidt's arrival. "And 2 bottles of San Pellegrino. And we'll need them now." The "we" was an order, not a request. "Of course, sir," Lena replied, her composure unruffled. She didn't scurry away. She simply turned with a measured efficiency and walked toward the bar. Her lack of flustered panic was to Lachlan a form of insubordination. He wanted people to jump. She merely walked. He watched her go, a strange feeling prickling the back of his neck, her posture, the set of her shoulders. It triggered a phantom sensation, a memory of intense blinding cold and the smell of pine needles. He shook his head, annoyed at the distraction. He had a deal to close. Lena returned with the water and poured it with a steady hand. She didn't spill a drop, even as Lachlan shifted impatiently in his seat. Her proximity brought a faint scent of lavender and something antiseptic like the hand soap used in hospitals. Another bizarre, unbidden association. "Your wine will be decanted and brought over by our sommelier shortly," she said, placing the water bottle precisely in the center of the table. Dr. Schmidt arrived then, a whirlwind of quiet authority and sharp intelligence. Greetings were exchanged, the perfunctory dance of the powerful. As they settled in, Lachlan's focus shifted entirely to the prize. He launched into his pitch, weaving a grand tapestry of corporate responsibility and technological benevolence. He spoke of Apex Innovations' new AI-driven diagnostic tools, of bringing elite medical analysis to the underserved. He was captivating, persuasive, a maestro of monologue. Through it all, Lena was a silent, efficient presence. She refilled water glasses without interrupting. She delivered the bread basket. She communicated their appetizer orders to the kitchen with a nod. She was so seamless, she was almost invisible. Yet for Lachlan, she was a persistent low-grade hum of annoyance. He felt her presence as a drag on his momentum. The appetizers arrived, scallops seared to perfection. but one plate was set down a fraction of a second later than the other two. "Is it standard practice here to serve guests at different times?" Lachlan asked, his voice dangerously soft. He didn't look at Lena directing the question to the table, at large a public shaming. Dr. Schmidt raised an eyebrow, looking from Lachlan to the perfectly adequate service. Peter looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Lena paused, her hand still on the plate. "My apologies, sir. The kitchen pass is quite narrow, and I wanted to ensure the plate was secure before setting it down." It was a reasonable professional explanation. To Lachlan, it was an excuse. "The result is what matters," he said, finally turning his gaze on her. And the result was a delay. It was then, as his cold, dismissive eyes met hers, that the flicker of recognition in Lena's mind ignited into a raging fire. The face was older, harsher the lines around the eyes and mouth, carved by years of ruthless command. But it was him, the jawline, the shape of his nose, the intense piercing blue of his eyes she had last seen, wide with terror and pain reflecting the flashing red and blue lights of an ambulance in a snow-swept ravine. Her breath caught in her throat. The silver tray in her other hand trembled almost imperceptibly. A wave of nausea and adrenaline washed over her, a ghostly echo of that terrible night 7 years ago. Lachlan Crowe, the name which she had only learned later from news reports, slammed into her consciousness. The tech billionaire from the horrific crash on Route 9 just outside of Aspen. The man whose life she had held in her hands. He looked at her now, his expression one of pure, unadulterated annoyance, completely oblivious. For him, this was just another Tuesday night, another power dinner, another slow waitress to be reprimanded. For her, it was the moment the ghost she had tried to bury for 7 years walked into her restaurant and complained about his scallops. Her composure, her carefully constructed wall of professional detachment, began to crack. She could suddenly feel the biting wind on her cheeks, the slick, sticky warmth of blood on her gloved hands, and the horrifying sound of crushed metal groaning under the weight of the snow. "Is there a problem?" Lachlan's voice cut through her reverie, sharp and impatient. Lena swallowed hard, forcing the memories down. "No, sir." She managed to say, her own voice sounding distant to her ears. "No problem at all. Enjoy your appetizers." She retreated to the kitchen, her heart hammering against her ribs. She leaned against a stainless steel counter, taking deep, shuddering breaths. The clatter and heat of the kitchen faded into a dull roar. All she could see was his face trapped in the wreckage. All she could hear was the frantic, desperate promise she had whispered to him as she worked to stop the bleeding. "Stay with me. Just stay with me. You're going to be okay." And now here he was. Okay. More than okay. And he was trying to get her fired. 7 years ago, Lena Petrova was not a waitress. She was a 24-year-old emergency medical technician, fresh out of training, working her first winter season in Pitkin County, Colorado. She was idealistic, driven by a fierce, almost naive desire to help people. She'd moved from Chicago to the mountains trading city grit for alpine air, believing she could make a real difference one life at a time. Her dream was to eventually become a flight paramedic, one of the elite few who performed rescues in the most extreme conditions. That night in February, the dream felt more like a nightmare. A blizzard had descended on the valley, with sudden brutal force turning the winding mountain roads into treacherous ribbons of ice. The call came in just after 2 a.m., a single-vehicle rollover on Route 9, a notorious stretch of road known as the Widow's Curve. The ambulance struggled through the whiteout conditions, its siren a lonely, muffled wail against the howling wind. When they arrived, the scene was chaos and eerie silence. A high-end black sedan, a Bentley from the looks of its one intact taillight, was upside down in a snow-filled ravine, its frame twisted around a massive pine tree. The engine was silent, but the smell of gasoline and antifreeze hung heavy in the freezing air. Lena and her senior partner, a grizzled veteran named Frank, slid down the snowy embankment. Frank took charge of scene safety checking for fuel leaks and the stability of the wreck, while Lena, as the primary caregiver, went straight for the driver's side. The window was shattered. Inside, a man was hanging upside down, held in place only by his seatbelt. His face was a mask of blood from a severe laceration on his forehead. His breathing was shallow and ragged. His expensive suit was torn, and his arm was bent at an unnatural angle. This was Lachlan Crowe, though at the time he was just the patient. "Sir, can you hear me?" Lena's voice was steady, cutting through the fog of his pain. She had trained for this, drilled for this. The protocol was a comforting anchor in the storm of reality. His eyes fluttered open. They were a startlingly bright blue, wide with shock and terror. My head," he slurred his words thick. "Okay, try not to move. My name is Lena. I'm an EMT. We're going to get you out of here." She reached through the shattered window, her gloved fingers finding his neck to stabilize his cervical spine. The pulse was thready but fast. "What's your name?" "Lachlan," he whispered. There was someone else. Lena's heart sank. "Someone else in the car with you." "Gideon," Lachlan mumbled. "My partner, Gideon Shaw." He was driving. Frank, having circled the vehicle, shouted over the wind. No one else in the vehicle. Lena driver's side airbag deployed, passengers did not. Passenger door is wide open. Looks like he got out. Footprints already faint under the falling snow led from the passenger side up the embankment and back toward the road. Their second ambulance, arriving moments later, would find Gideon Shaw a quarter-mile up the road, stumbling along in a daze. He had a dislocated shoulder and a few cuts, but he had managed to crawl from the wreckage and abandon his partner. His first words to the paramedics who found him were not, "Is my friend okay?" but, "You have to help me, my arm is killing me." Lena didn't know that then. All she knew was that her patient was fading. His pupils were sluggish. His blood pressure was dropping. Classic signs of a traumatic brain injury and internal bleeding. The car was too unstable to begin a full extrication. They needed the fire department with the jaws of life, but the blizzard was holding them up. They were losing him. "Lachlan, you need to stay with me," she said, her voice firm but gentle. She was holding C-spine, one hand braced against the cold metal of the door frame, the other cradling his head. Snow whipped into the car, melting on his bloody face. "Talk to me. Tell me what you do for a living, Lachlan." "Computers," he rasped. "I build things." "Good. That's good. Focus on that. What's your favorite thing to build?" She was fighting to keep him conscious, to keep his brain engaged. It was a desperate, flimsy tool against a potentially fatal bleed, but it was all she had. His eyes started to roll back. "No, no, no," she said, raising her voice slightly. "Lachlan, look at me, look at my eyes." He struggled to focus on her. She saw something glinting on his wrist, the shattered face of an absurdly expensive-looking watch. A Patek Philippe. The hands were frozen at 2:07 a.m. A fragment of the car's high-end sound system was still emitting a faint tinny sound, a barely audible classical piece. Vivaldi. The contrast was surreal. "We can't wait for fire," Frank yelled. "He's going into shock. We have to get him out now." What happened next was a blur of brutal physical effort. Frank used a pry bar on the door, while Lena, still maintaining C-spine as best she could, tried to protect Lachlan from the jostling. The groaning of metal was a terrifying sound. Finally, the door hinge gave way with a screech. They worked together, a practiced and desperate ballet in the snow. They fitted a cervical collar, strapped him to a backboard, and began the arduous task of lifting him out of the ravine. He was a dead weight, his life, slipping through their fingers with every passing second. As they hauled him up the slippery embankment, his eyes found hers again. The terror was gone, replaced by a dim, fading light. "Thank you?" He breathed the words, barely a puff of vapor in the cold air. Then his eyes closed. He had lost consciousness. They loaded him into the ambulance, Lena straddling his body, starting an IV, pushing fluids, calling out vitals to Frank, who was driving like a madman through the snow. The ride to Aspen Valley Hospital was the longest 20 minutes of her life. She performed CPR twice when his heart faltered. She never stopped working, never stopped fighting for the stranger on her gurney. They handed him off to the emergency room trauma team, a flurry of green scrubs and controlled chaos. Lena stood back, her job done. She was covered in his blood. Her muscles ached. Her adrenaline began to recede, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion and a tremor in her hands she couldn't stop. She never saw him again. She followed the news, of course. Learned his full name, Lachlan Crow, the tech titan. Learned that he had survived thanks to the swift action of first responders. learned that his partner Gideon Shaw had made a full recovery. The official report said the crash was due to icy conditions. But Lena remembered Gideon's footprints leading away from the car. She remembered Lachlan's slurred insistence that Gideon had been driving. She always wondered what really happened on that curve. The incident broke something in her. She had saved him, but the cost was high. For weeks she had nightmares of the crash, of the cold, of the look in his eyes. She saw his face in every patient. The visceral, intimate violence of trauma care had scarred her more than she was willing to admit. Her hands, once so steady, now trembled when she tried to start an IV. The dream of being a flight paramedic died, replaced by a quiet, gnawing anxiety. After another 6 months of struggling through shifts, she quit. She told everyone it was for family reasons, which was partly true. Her younger brother Leo had been diagnosed with a severe form of dyscalculia and needed specialized, expensive schooling back in the Midwest. She moved to be closer to him, taking on mundane jobs, retail office work, and finally waitressing that paid the bills, but kept the blood and the screaming at bay. She had buried Lena the EMT deep, deep down. But tonight, at the Gilded Quill, Lachlan Crowe had handed her a shovel. Back in the gleaming, frantic world of the restaurant kitchen, Lena splashed cold water on her face. Her reflection in the polished steel of a refrigerator door was a stranger's, a pale woman with haunted eyes wearing a black apron. Petrova Table 7 is ready to order. The voice of her manager, Mr. Dubois, sliced through her thoughts. Dubois was a man who worshipped at the altar of perfect service, a self-proclaimed hospitality artist, whose temper was as legendary as the restaurant's wine list. "Yes, Mr. Dubois," she answered, her voice trembling slightly. He narrowed his eyes. "Are you well? You look flushed. If you're sick, you know the policy." "I'm fine," she said, straightening up, forcing the practiced neutral mask back onto her face. "Just a bit warm in here." He grunted, unconvinced, and swept away to chastise a busboy. Lena took one more deep breath and pushed through the swinging doors, back into the hushed elegance of the dining room, back to him. As she approached their table, she could hear snippets of their conversation. Lachlan was holding court, his voice a smooth, confident baritone. "The algorithm's predictive power is unprecedented, Annalise. We're talking about identifying markers for neurological disorders years before symptoms manifest. Think of the lives we could change." Dr. Schmidt listened intently, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "The potential is undeniable, Lachlan. But my foundation is concerned with access and ethics. How do you ensure this technology doesn't just become another luxury for the wealthy? How do you protect the privacy of that data?" Lachlan waved a dismissive hand. "Details, Annalise. Logistics. We'll set up a nonprofit arm. The Apex Cares initiative I mentioned. It's all in the proposal." Lena's hands tightened into fists at her side. A nonprofit arm. An initiative. He spoke of changing lives with such casual, sweeping arrogance as if it were a concept he had invented. He had no idea that the life he was living was a gift from someone he now saw as less than nothing, an inefficient cog in the service machine. The irony was a physical, bitter taste in her mouth. She was working this grueling double-shift job, sacrificing her own dreams to pay for her brother Leo's tuition at the Kettler Institute, a school renowned for its work with learning disabilities like his, a school that could desperately use a grant from a foundation like Dr. Schmidt's, a school that could be transformed by the very technology Lachlan was peddling. Her world and his, impossibly tragically, were intertwined. She cleared her throat softly. "Are you ready to order your main courses, or would you like a few more minutes?" Lachlan didn't even look up. "We're ready. I'll have the duck confit, and make sure it's crisp. The last time I had it here, it was disappointingly flaccid." He turned his attention back to Dr. Schmidt. "Peter will have the steak, medium rare, more rare than medium." Peter nodded mutely. Dr. Schmidt looked at Lena, offering a small, sympathetic smile. "I'll have the halibut, please. Thank you." Lena wrote down the orders, her mind racing. Should she say something? What could she possibly say? "Excuse me, Mr. Crowe, sorry to interrupt your multi-billion-dollar pitch, but I just wanted to remind you that I'm the reason you're not a frozen corpse in a Colorado ravine." He would think she was insane. He'd have her fired, maybe even arrested. He wouldn't believe her. Why would he? In his world, heroes were titans of industry, not small, tired women who served them duck. He probably didn't even remember her face. In the chaos of the crash, she was just a uniform, a pair of hands, a reassuring voice in the darkness. The rest of the meal was an exercise in supreme self-control. Lena moved like a phantom around the table, performing her duties with flawless precision. She refilled his wine glass exactly when it needed it. She crumbed the table between courses. She became the model of the efficiency he craved, all while a war raged within her. Her mind kept flashing back to the crash, but this time she remembered new details. She remembered Lachlan's business partner, Gideon Shaw, at the hospital the next day. She and Frank had been there finishing their paperwork. They saw him in the hallway, his arm in a sling, talking on his phone in a hushed, frantic tone. "It's handled," Gideon had said, his back to them. "The story is the ice. No one will question it. He doesn't remember the details anyway. The doctors said he has partial amnesia from the head trauma. Yes, the buyout offer still stands. In fact, his accident might just make him more agreeable." At the time, Lena had thought it was just corporate callousness. Now, sitting in the same room as the man he'd been talking about, the words took on a darker, more sinister meaning. Gideon had been driving. Gideon had left him for dead. And Gideon had apparently used the accident to his advantage. She had saved Lachlan's life only for him to be betrayed by his own partner. Lachlan, meanwhile, was growing more expansive, more confident as the dinner progressed. The wine, the food, the feeling of an impending victory made him magnanimous. He was on the verge of closing the deal with Dr. Schmidt, a deal that would be a PR coup for Apex. "So, Annalise, are we in agreement?" he said, leaning forward. "Shall we have the lawyers draft the preliminary agreement tomorrow?" Dr. Schmidt took a slow sip of her water, her gaze thoughtful. "I'm impressed, Lachlan, truly, but I still have reservations about the human element. A company's soul isn't in its mission statement. It's in how it treats people, every person, from its board members to its janitors." As if on cue, Lachlan caught Lena's eye as she approached to clear the main course plates. He wanted to demonstrate his power, his control over every aspect of his environment. He saw an opportunity. "Let's talk about the human element," he said, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. He raised his voice just enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Take our server here, for instance. She's been adequate, barely. But there's no spark, no passion. Just a mechanical execution of duties. It's this kind of listless mediocrity, this lack of drive, that holds people back. It's a mindset I simply cannot tolerate in my company or in my life." Every word was a hammer blow. Lena froze, her hands hovering over his plate. The entire dining room seemed to fall silent. Peter stared at his lap. Dr. Schmidt's expression hardened, her eyes flashing with disapproval. This was it. He wasn't just a rude customer anymore. He was using her, her job, her very existence as a prop in his grand performance of power. He was lecturing the world on passion and drive, completely ignorant of the passion and drive she had used to keep his heart beating. The carefully constructed dam inside her broke. The flood of memory, of injustice, of pure, white-hot fury was overwhelming. The tremor returned to her hands, not from fear, but from rage. Mr. Dubois, who had been watching from across the room, saw the shift in her posture and began striding toward their table, his face a thundercloud. He knew the signs of a confrontation, but he was too late. Lena slowly lowered her hands and looked directly at Lachlan Crowe. The fear was gone. The professional neutrality was gone. All that was left was the truth, cold and hard and 7 years old. "You're right, Mr. Crowe," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying an astonishing weight. "My mind is elsewhere tonight. I've been a bit distracted." She looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time he saw something beyond the uniform. He saw an intensity in her eyes that mirrored the blizzard from his nightmares. "I was just trying to remember," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "The last time I saw a man's life held back, not by a lack of drive, but by a crushed tibia and a severe epidural hematoma." Lachlan's smirk vanished. His face went blank with confusion. "What did you just say?" Mr. Dubois arrived at the table. "Ms. Petrova, that is enough. You will apologize to the gentleman at once and then collect your things. You are fired." Lena didn't even look at her manager. Her eyes were locked on Lachlan's. The ghost on Route 9 was about to speak. A new kind of silence descended upon Table 19, a silence so abrupt and profound it seemed to absorb all the ambient sound in the restaurant. It was a vacuum created by Lena's words, clinical and brutal, landing on the pristine white tablecloth like drops of blood. Crushed tibia. Epidural hematoma. Mr. Dubois' furious declaration of her termination hung in the air, a command already rendered impotent by the sheer gravity of the moment. Peter looked as if he'd seen a ghost, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. Dr. Anneliese Schmidt leaned back almost imperceptibly, her sharp analytical gaze missing nothing, her expression one of intense, captivated curiosity. This was no longer a business dinner. It was a reckoning. Lachlan Crowe stared at Lena, his world tilting on its axis. His initial reaction was a surge of pure cold fury. How dare she? How dare this insignificant server use the most traumatic event of his life as a weapon against him? He saw it as a desperate, pathetic ploy, a shakedown artist or a disturbed fantasist. "What did you just say?" he demanded, his voice, a low, dangerous growl meant to intimidate, to crush. It was the voice he used to dismantle competitors and discipline subordinates. It had never failed him. Until now. "I said you are fired!" Mr. Dubois shrieked, his face a mottled canvas of crimson and white. He saw his carefully curated evening, and potentially his career imploding. Decorum had been breached. The sacred pact between guest and establishment had been violated. He lunged forward, his hand reaching to grab Lena's arm and physically drag her away. "Security I need." Lena flinched back, but her eyes never left Lachlan's. It was this refusal to be cowed, this unwavering focus on him, that unsettled Lachlan more than her words. Before Dubois' fingers could touch her, she spoke again, her voice cutting through his panicked shouts with the chilling precision of a scalpel. "My name is Lena Petrova," she said, each word a carefully placed stone, building a bridge to a past he had tried to bury. 7 years ago, on the night of February 12th, on a stretch of Route 9 just outside Aspen, your Bentley Mulsanne went off the road and into a ravine. It came to rest against a pine tree. The specificity of the date, the model of the car, it sent a jolt through him. But his defenses were still strong, built over a lifetime of suspicion. "That's public knowledge," he shot back, his voice laced with scorn. He felt a desperate need to regain control of the narrative, to frame her as an opportunistic crank. "The crash was in all the papers. Anyone with an internet connection could look that up. It proves nothing." "You're right." Lena conceded, her calm infuriating him. Then she delivered the next blow, her voice dropping slightly, becoming more conspiratorial, more damning. "But the papers got the story wrong. Could they look up the fact that you weren't driving? Could they look up the fact that your partner Gideon Shaw was behind the wheel when he lost control? Could they look up the fact that he crawled out of the wreckage, his injuries minor compared to yours, and left you there to die in the cold?" The air crackled. The name Gideon Shaw, spoken with such certainty, such accusation, hit Lachlan like a physical punch. Peter let out a small, strangled gasp. Lachlan's face, already tight with anger, went stark white. This was not public knowledge. This was the opposite of public knowledge. The official story, the one Gideon had tearfully recounted to him in the hospital, the one Lachlan's own fractured memory had never been able to contest, was that Lachlan had been driving. Gideon was the hero who had staggered through the blizzard for help. It was the foundational myth of their breakup and Gideon's subsequent success. "That's a lie," Lachlan hissed, but the words were hollow, a paper shield against a cannonball. For years, a tiny splinter-like doubt about Gideon's story had lodged itself deep in his subconscious. Gideon's over-the-top sympathy, his haste to buy Lachlan out, his inability to ever look Lachlan directly in the eye when they spoke of that night, it all coalesced in this horrifying moment. "Is it?" Lena pressed her gaze, unblinking. "Or is that just the story you were told while your brain was still swelling? The story you chose to believe? I will have you removed by the police." Mr. Dubois bellowed, his authority completely shattered his voice, now just noise. "Let her speak," Dr. Schmidt commanded. Her voice, though quiet, sliced through the chaos with absolute authority. It was not a request. Mr. Dubois' mouth snapped shut. Peter froze. Even Lachlan, for the first time in the evening, deferred. He looked at Dr. Schmidt, whose expression was now one of clinical, piercing evaluation. She wasn't just watching a scene. She was conducting an analysis of his character under extreme pressure. He turned back to Lena, a maelstrom of rage fear and a terrifying burgeoning curiosity raging within him. He gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. Continue. Lena took a small step closer, her presence filling the space. She was no longer a server. She was a witness, giving testimony. You were hanging upside down, held in place by the seatbelt. Your pulse was 130 and thready. Your blood pressure was 90/50. You were going into hypovolemic shock from a significant head wound and suspected internal bleeding. She recited his vitals from 7 years ago, with the same detached precision a sommelier would use to describe a vintage. Lachlan felt a wave of vertigo. These were not the sensationalist details of a newspaper article. These were the cold, hard facts from a medical chart. She went on, her voice a steady, relentless current. You were wearing a dark charcoal Xenia suit, hand-stitched. There was a tear in the left shoulder, and on your left wrist. She paused, letting the detail land. You wore a Patek Philippe watch, a Calatrava. The crystal was completely shattered. Its hands were frozen at 2:07 a.m. Instinctively, Lachlan's eyes shot down to his own wrist, to the new Patek that sat there now. He could almost feel the ghost of the old one, the cold metal, the sharp edges of the broken glass. A memory slick and dark like oil began to seep through the cracks of his defenses. He remembered the watch, a gift to himself after his first major success. He remembered the pride he felt wearing it, and he remembered a horrifying twisting lurch and his arm slamming against the dashboard. You were fading in and out of consciousness. Lena said, her voice softening the clinical tone, replaced by something more personal, the memory of her own desperate fight that night. I had to keep you awake. I kept asking you questions. I asked you what you did. You said you build things. And through it all, there was a sound, so faint I could barely hear it over the wind. She leaned in just a fraction, her eyes locking with his, holding him captive. Through the broken speakers of your car's stereo, a song was playing. Vivaldi. Winter from the Four Seasons. That was it. The key. The final intimate, impossible detail that no one could have known. It was his mother's favorite piece of music. She had died 2 years prior to the accident, and that night, February 12th, had been the anniversary of her passing. It was a private ritual, a moment of solitary grief he shared with no one. He would listen to that one piece of music and remember her. Not even Gideon had known about the significance of that date or that music. The dam in his mind did not break. It exploded. The refined ambiance of the gilded quill vanished in a cataclysmic rush of sensory memory. The smell of pine and ozone from the deployed airbag. The sharp metallic taste of blood in his mouth. The horrifying high-pitched screech of metal groaning under the weight of snow. The blinding, disorienting pain in his head, a crushing pressure that blotted out all thought. The impossible penetrating cold that seemed to seep into his very bones. And through the terror, a voice. A woman's voice, calm, insistent, a lifeline in the roaring darkness. Stay with me, Lachlan. Look at me. Just stay with me. He saw a face then leaning through the jagged frame of the shattered driver's side window. A young woman's face framed by a snow-dusted parka hood, illuminated in the chaotic strobing dance of red and blue emergency lights. Her eyes weren't filled with pity or fear, but with a startling, ferocious intensity. A determination that willed him to live. He blinked, and the strobing lights of the memory merged with the soft ambient lighting of the restaurant. The face from the past, the face of his savior, fused with the face of the waitress standing before him. The same eyes, the same quiet strength. It was her. The carefully constructed edifice of his life, his identity as a self-made man, his belief in his own judgment, his memory of his own past crumbled to dust. The arrogance, the impatience, the sheer crushing weight of his ego evaporated, leaving him utterly exposed, raw, and shaking. He stared at Lena Petrova, his mouth agape, his lungs struggling for air. The woman he had berated, belittled, and tried to destroy was the angel from his darkest hour, the reason he had a life to be arrogant with. It was you, he whispered, the sound, ragged, a stranger's voice torn from his own throat. You saved my life. Lena simply nodded, a single tear finally escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. The weight of 7 years of silence, of being an unseen, unacknowledged ghost, had finally been lifted. Lachlan Crowe, the titan of industry, The man who moved markets and never waited for anyone, slowly, unsteadily pushed himself to his feet. He looked at the woman before him, truly seeing her for the very first time, and for the first time in his adult life, he had absolutely no idea what to do or say next. The silence that followed Lachlan's whispered revelation was a physical entity heavier and more suffocating than the opulent air of the gilded quill. It was the sound of a universe reordering itself around a single impossible truth. Lachlan remained standing, his body rigid, trapped between two worlds. One was the here and now, a world of starched linen, fine wine, and a deal hanging in the balance. The other was a snow-choked ravine from 7 years ago, a memory that was now rushing back, not as a story, but as a visceral sensory assault. He could feel the phantom ache in his leg, the ghost of a crushed tibia. He felt the icy sting of snowflakes melting on his bloody forehead. The murmur of the surrounding diners warped into the low, mournful howl of the wind through broken glass. He looked at Lena, and for a terrifying second, her black apron and crisp white shirt dissolved into the dark, heavy parka of an EMT, her face pale and determined under the flashing strobes of an ambulance light. Shame and emotion, he typically viewed as a weakness in others, flooded him with the force of a physical blow. It was hot, acidic, and rose from his stomach to his throat. Every arrogant pronouncement he had ever made, every lecture on efficiency, every moment of impatience he had ever displayed, coalesced into a single monstrous monument to his own ignorance. He had built an empire on the principle of ruthless drive, yet he had just berated the very woman whose drive had kept his own heart beating. His entire life philosophy felt like a castle of sand, and the tide was coming in. "Sit down," Lachlan Dr. Annalise Schmidt said. Her voice was not unkind, but it held the firm, grounding tone of a doctor resetting a bone. It cut through his spiraling thoughts and anchored him back to the present. He obeyed numbly, his limbs feeling disconnected from his mind. He sank back into the plush chair, the movement stiff and uncoordinated. His gaze fell upon Lena, who stood there, a solitary island in the storm he had created. The fury in her eyes had subsided, replaced by a profound, shimmering weariness. He saw the years of quiet struggle etched around her eyes, struggles he was now beginning to understand he was tangentially responsible for. The trauma that had broken her had been the very act of saving him. I am so sorry." He stammered the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. They were pebbles thrown against a mountain of debt. "I had no idea. I didn't remember. Please, you have to believe me." Mr. Dubois, seeing his 5-star evening devolve into a career-ending catastrophe, saw a lifeline in Lachlan's words and lunged for it. "Amnesia!" he exclaimed, his voice high and strained as he rushed to Lachlan's side. "A classic case of post-traumatic amnesia. Mr. Crow, perfectly understandable. You couldn't possibly have known." He tried to cast a reassuring, sycophantic smile at Lachlan, hoping to realign himself with power. Lachlan didn't even grant him a glance. His entire world had narrowed to Lena, and Lena in turn ignored her fawning manager completely. She looked at Lachlan, and in her gaze he saw not accusation, but a deep, sad understanding. "I know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You were in bad shape." Her simple acceptance was more damning than any tirade could have been. It underscored the chasm between them, her quiet strength and his loud, empty power. His mind, now firing with a desperate clarity, seized on another part of her story. Gideon Shaw was driving. He left you there to die. The betrayal hit him with a fresh wave of nausea. Gideon, his first business partner, his friend, the man who had wept at his hospital bedside, speaking of the tragic, unavoidable accident. The man who had then presented a generous buyout offer for Lachlan's shares in their first company, while Lachlan was still addled on painkillers, arguing that Lachlan needed to focus on his recovery, not the stress of a startup. It had all been a lie, a cold, calculated, murderous lie. Gideon hadn't just profited from his tragedy, he had authored it. A new kind of fire, cold and purposeful, began to burn through the fog of shame. He turned to his associate, who was watching the scene unfold with the wide-eyed terror of a man witnessing a plane crash. "Peter," Lachlan said, his voice regaining its familiar steel, but tempered with a new sober weight. "Get my chief counsel on the phone, now. I want a team assembled before morning. They are to pull every document, every email, every recorded call, every financial statement, related to my professional and personal separation from Gideon Shaw. I want a full forensic audit. I want to know everything. Right now, Mr. Crow, Peter squeaked, fumbling for his phone. Before you take another breath, Peter, go. As Peter scurried away, weaving through the stunned tables of diners, Lachlan turned his full attention back to the woman who had upended his world. The deal with Dr. Schmidt, the reputation of Apex, the very foundations of his empire, all of it seemed secondary to the question that now consumed him. Why are you working here? He asked the question raw with genuine confusion and a desperate need to understand. Someone with your training, your courage, your character. Why serve people like me? Lena's formidable composure finally seemed to fracture. It was one thing to confront him, to speak the truth she had held for so long. It was another to be asked to lay bare the quiet desperation of her life. She looked down at her hands, which were now trembling slightly. Life happens, Mr. Crow. She said, her voice thick with unshed tears. The things I saw, the thing that happened to you, it changes a person. I couldn't be an EMT anymore. The nightmares, the shaking, the drive you were talking about, it drove me right into a wall. She took a shaky breath. And there are other things. Responsibilities. She hesitated. The vulnerability of the admission feeling profound. My younger brother, Leo, she finally confessed. He's an amazing kid, but he struggles. He has a severe form of dyscalculia and other learning disabilities. The world is just wired differently for him. He needs a special kind of school to have any chance at a decent life. I'm putting him through the Kettler Institute. It's expensive. This, she said, gesturing vaguely at the restaurant around her, pays for that. The Kettler Institute. At the mention of the name, Dr. Anneliese Schmidt, who had been a silent analytical observer, leaned forward. Her pen, which had been still beside her water glass, was now poised over her notebook. The Kettler Institute is one of our foundation's primary beneficiaries for educational grants. She stated, her sharp eyes now fixed on Lena with a new profound respect. We are, in fact, currently reviewing proposals for a new technology integration program. We believe AI-assisted learning tools could revolutionize their curriculum for students just like your brother. The final piece of the cosmic puzzle clicked into place with an almost audible clang. The universe wasn't just cruel, it was an ironic, meticulous architect. Lachlan was here pitching the very technology that could transform the life of the brother of the woman who had saved his own, a woman whose livelihood he had threatened moments before over a trivial delay. His cynical Apex Cares initiative wasn't just a PR stunt anymore. It had a face, it had a name, it had a soul, and that soul was standing before him, about to be unemployed because of his own monstrous pride. He looked from Lena's tear-streaked face to Dr. Schmidt's expectant one. A path forward, a chance for atonement appeared before him. It was a terrifying, exhilarating opportunity. First, he had to clear away the wreckage of his own making. He turned to Mr. Dubois, his eyes blazing with a righteous fury he hadn't felt in years. You will not be firing Ms. Petrova. He commanded, his voice low and resonant, carrying across the silent dining room. On the contrary, you will go to your office and you will cut a check for a bonus equivalent to her last 3 months' salary. You will then return and offer her a sincere, heartfelt apology for your conduct. And from this moment forward, if she is treated with anything less than the utmost respect and deference by you or any member of your staff, I will personally buy this restaurant, liquidate its assets, and ensure your name is blacklisted from every fine dining establishment in this city. Am I unequivocally clear? Mr. Dubois, pale as a tablecloth, could only manage a series of jerky, terrified nods before scurrying away. Lachlan then rose from his chair, his movements deliberate and sure. He walked around the table and stood before Lena, closing the space between the man he was and the man he desperately wanted to become. What you did for me, I can never repay it. He said, his voice stripped of all artifice, raw and sincere. A thank you is an insult. Money feels cheap, but they are a start. He took a deep breath, his mind so adept at hostile takeovers and market analysis, now formulating the most important proposal of his life. The Apex Cares initiative. It's a shell, a hollow idea conceived for selfish reasons. It needs a heart. It needs a director who has integrity, who has real-world empathy, who understands what it truly means to save a life, not just talk about it in a boardroom. He looked directly into her eyes. "Lena Petrova, I'm not offering you a job. I'm asking for your help. I'm begging for it. Come work for me. Not for apex innovations, but for the foundation we are going to build from the ground up. A real one. I want you to run it. I want you to be its president, its conscience. Tell us where the money should go. Tell us who truly needs help. Your first official act will be to draft a grant proposal for the complete and total funding of the Kettler Institute, equipping it with our best technology and any other resource its faculty needs. Your brother's tuition is covered for life. Your salary will be whatever you deem fair. I only have one condition." He paused, his own eyes welling with an emotion he couldn't name. "Help me become a man worthy of the life you saved." For a long moment, Lena just stared at him, her mind struggling to comprehend the sheer seismic shift that had just occurred. The offer was impossible, a fantasy. But the look in his eyes, the desperate pleading sincerity, was undeniably real. Tears streamed down her face, but these were not the tears of sorrow or frustration she was used to. They were tears of shock, of vindication, of a hope so overwhelming it felt like a physical release. The long, dark, grueling chapter of her life, the double shifts, the constant gnawing worry, the ghost of Route 9, was suddenly miraculously over. She saw a future for Leo, bright and full of possibility. She saw a purpose for herself, the one she thought she had buried forever in a snowbank in Colorado. She saw the chance not just to heal her own life, but to channel her experience into helping countless others. Taking a deep, shuddering breath that carried the weight of 7 years, she nodded. "Yes," she whispered the single word, remaking her world. "Okay." A brilliant, genuine smile spread across Dr. Annalise Schmidt's face. She closed her proposal folder with a soft, final snap. "Lachlan," she said, her voice warm with approval. "It seems you've found the human element you were looking for after all. Have your new president send me her proposal. The Schmidt Foundation would be honored to partner with you." The deal was done. Not the one Lachlan had come here to make, but a far greater one. It wasn't a contract signed in ink, but a covenant sealed by a 7-year-old debt, witnessed by grace and delivered by the quiet, unshakable courage of a woman who until tonight had been just a slow waitress. What happens when a single moment buried by time and trauma resurfaces to shatter our reality? The story of Lachlan Crowe and Lena Petrova is more than just a dramatic twist of fate. It's a powerful reminder that every person we encounter has a story we know nothing about. The impatient billionaire and the tired waitress were not strangers, but two souls bound by a life-altering event. Lachlan's journey from arrogance to profound humility, and Lena's from silent struggle to vindication, shows us that true wealth isn't measured in stock prices, but in acts of compassion and chances for redemption. It challenges us to look beyond the surface, to treat every individual with the dignity they deserve, for we never know whose hands once held our very lives. If this story of connection and second chances moved, you please take a moment to hit the like button and share it with someone who might need this message. What would you have done in Lena's position? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that reveal the extraordinary drama hidden in our ordinary lives.